one of the very old books that I have. My dad had got when I was just around 7 or 8 years. Um, I could hardly read, but then dad and mom would take turns to read out stories. This is by the Grimm brothers. It's Grimm's Fairy Tales. It's by Ward Lock and Company Limited, printed in Great Britain by Cox and Wayman Limited. Regarding preface, it's for more than a century, the stories so lovingly collected by the brothers Grimm have been the delight of children and of others who, whatever their age, will always be children at heart. Truly, even today, when I read this, I'm just there. The child in me is enthralled reading those stories once again. So, Jacob Grimm was born in 1785, his brother Wilhelm a year later. Their father died while they were still lads, and they learnt only too well that the wolf at the door may be more than a fable. All through their lives, they were the best of friends, living together and sharing the same studies and hobbies. On leaving school, they became greatly interested in German and Danish folklore and spent much of their time wandering about the country, gleaning from peasants and the simpler townspeople a rich harvest of legends, which they would write down as nearly as possible in the words in which they were told. The first collection was published in 1812. Other stories were gradually added until there were more than 200. Some, it may be noted, are found in various forms in many languages and have doubtless come to us from a period long before there were any books at all. This selection comprises most of the more popular stories, especially those suitable for younger children. Complete editions can be obtained from the same publishers. Now, the contents of this particular one is, first is the Frog Prince, then Hansel and Gretel, the Fisherman and his Wife, the Six Servants, the Goblin Cobblers, the Brave Little Tailor, King Throstlebeard, Mother Holle, the Bottled Spirit, the Spindle, the Shuttle and the Needle, the Magic Herbs, then Rumpelstiltskin, the Blue Light, One Eye, Two Eye and Three Eyes, the Shoes that were danced into holes, the Drummer, the Golden Goose, the Boy who learned to shudder, the Wise Griffin, the Goose Girl at the Well, the Three Spinning Women, the 12 Brothers, Cocky and Henny, and the Cobbler and the Tailor. Then you have the Drudge of all work, the Earth Mannequin, the Six Swans, the Magic Wallet, Hat and Horn, the Three Magic Gifts, the Three Golden Hairs, the True Bride. Now the cover that you see here is the Six Swans. So let me just see if there is. Okay. So okay, I think I should just read this out since that's the cover. I'm going to see where it is now. Let me see the 158 it's written. Okay. So yeah. It's the Six Swans. A king once hunted a wild stag so eagerly that none of his followers could keep up with him. As evening drew on, he paused and looked round and saw that he had lost the track completely. Everywhere he looked for a way out, but none was to be found. Then he saw an old woman with a palsied head coming towards him. She was a witch. But he addressed her and said, "My good woman, can you show me the way out of the wood?" "Yes, Sir King," she answered, "I can, but on one condition, which if you do not fulfill, must stay in the wood and die of hunger." "What is the condition?" asked the king. "I have a daughter," said the old woman, "who is as pretty a girl as is to be seen anywhere in the world, and it is worthy to be your queen. Marry her, and I will show you the path out of the wood." The king was so alarmed at his position that he at once consented, and the old woman led him to her house where her daughter was sitting by the fire. The girl received the king as if she had been expecting him, and although he could not but admit that she was beautiful, he did not take to her and was filled with secret horror at the sight of her. When he had placed the girl on his saddle, the old woman showed him the way out of the forest. He reached his royal castle safely, and the marriage was solemnized. Now the king had been married before and had had 7 children by his first wife, 6 boys and 1 girl, whom he loved better than anything else in the world. Because he was afraid the stepmother might not treat the children well and would do them some injury, he had them shut up in a solitary castle in the middle of a wood. It lay so far from the beaten track that it was difficult to find, and he himself could not have found the way had not a wise woman given him a ball of yarn of such a marvelous quality that when he threw it in front of him, it unwound itself and showed the direction. The king went so often to his dear children that the new queen noticed how often he was absent, and he was curious to know where he went and what he did all alone in the wood. She bribed the servants, and they at last betrayed the secret and told her of the ball which alone could show the way. After that she could not rest till she had discovered where the king kept the ball. Then she made several little white silk shirts, and as she had learnt magic arts from her mother, she sewed magic into the shirts with every stitch. So once when the king had gone hunting, she took the little shirts and went into the wood, and the ball of yarn showed her the path. The children, hearing someone coming in the distance, thought it was their father and rushed to meet him full of joy. Thereupon the queen threw a shirt over each, and immediately the children were turned into swans and flew away out of the wood. The queen went home pleased with her day's work, thinking she had got rid of her stepchildren, but the little girl had not run out with the others to meet her, and the queen did not know of her existence. The next day the king went to see his children and found only the girl. "Where are your brothers?" he inquired. "Ah, dear father," she answered, "they have gone away and left me alone." She related how she had looked out of a window and seen them all change into swans, and she showed the king the feathers they had dropped in the yard as they flew away. The king grieved, but he had no suspicion that the queen had been guilty of the crime, and because he feared something might happen to his daughter too, he proposed to take her home. But the child was frightened of her stepmother and begged to be allowed to stay one more night in the woodland castle. The poor child thought to herself, "I am no use to anyone without my brothers. I will go and look for them." When night came on, she escaped and fled into the wood. The whole night, the next day, and the next, she walked on and on till for very weariness she could go no further. Then she saw a forester's hut and went up the steps and found a room with 6 little beds in it. She dare not trust herself to lie down on one of the beds, so she crept underneath, intending to pass the night on the hard floor. Just as the sun was going down, however, she heard a rustling and saw that 6 swans had flown in at the window. They sat on the floor, blew on each other, and blew all their feathers off, and then stripped off their swan skin like a shirt. When the girl saw they were her brothers, she was overjoyed and crept out from under the bed. They were not less pleased at seeing her little sister again, but their joy was of short duration. "This is no place for you to stay," and they said to her. "It is a refuge for robbers, and when they come and find you, they will murder you." "Couldn't you protect me?" asked the little sister. "No," they answered, "because we may only lay aside our swan plumage for a quarter of an hour every evening. Then we may assume human form, but we are changed back into swans afterwards." The sister cried and said, "Couldn't you be released from the spell?" "Alas, no," they answered. "The conditions are too severe. You would have to go 6 years without speaking or laughing, and in that time would have to make us 6 shirts out of primroses. If one single word passed your lips, all the labor would be thrown away." No sooner had the brothers told her these conditions than the quarter of an hour was up, and in the shape of swans they flew out of the window again. The girl, however, resolved to free her brothers even if it cost her her life. She left the hut and went into the wood, climbed a tree, and passed the night there. The next morning she went out and gathered primroses and began to sew. There were no one to speak to, and she had no inclination to laugh or to do anything but sit at her work. She had been thus employed for a long time when it happened that the king of the country came with his huntsmen to the tree on which the maiden sat. They called out, "Who are you?" But she made no reply. "Come down here to us," they said. "We won't hurt you." In response, she only shook her head. When they continued to ply her with questions, she threw down her gold necklace, hoping that would satisfy them. Still, they would not go away, so she took off her sash and threw that down, and then her garters, and by the degrees every article of clothing she could spare, till she was left with nothing but her undergarments. The huntsmen were not going to be put off with her clothes. They climbed up the tree, carried her down, and led her to the king. The king asked, "Who are you, and what are you doing up in the tree?" But she did not answer. He asked the question in every language he knew, and she remained as dumb as a fish. But because of her beauty, the king's heart was touched, and he fell greatly in love with her. He threw his cloak over her, put her on his horse, and brought her to his castle. Here she was arrayed in rich garments, and she was as radiant in her beauty as the summer day. Yet no word passed her lips. She sat by the king's side at the table, and her modest bearing pleased him so much that he exclaimed, "This is the maiden I wish to wed, and no other in the world," and a few days later he married her. The king, unfortunately, had a wicked mother who was not satisfied with her son's choice and who spoke evil of the young queen. "Who knows what the hussy may be?" she said. "A dumb creature is not a fit person to be queen." In about a year, the queen bore her first child. The old woman took it away from her, and while she was asleep, daubed the young mother's mouth with blood. Then she went to the king and accused his wife of being a cannibal. The king would not believe it and said he would not have anything done to her. She sat quietly at her work, busily hemming the shirts and thinking of nothing else. The next time she brought a pretty boy into the world, and the wicked mother-in-law practiced the same deception. And again the king refused to believe the story. He said, She's so pious, kind, and gentle. It is impossible that she could do such a thing. If she could speak and defend herself, her innocence would be as clear as the daylight." But when a third time the newborn babe was stolen by the old hag, and the queen was charged with cannibalism, yet did not make any defense, the king could not help himself and was obliged to hand over to the judges, who condemned her to be burnt to death. When the day came on which the sentence was to be carried out, the last day of the 6 years was up, and the period in which she had promised never to speak or to laugh, and she had freed her dear brothers from the spell. The 6 shirts were all finished, except that one still wanted a sleeve. As she was led to the scaffold, the queen took the shirts on her arm. As she stood there, and the faggots round her were just going to be set alight, She saw the 6 swans flying through the air. Now she knew that her release was coming, and her heart beat fast with joy. The swans descended and came quite near so that she could throw the shirts over them, and directly they came in contact with the shirts, the and the swan skins fell off, and her brother stood in flesh before her, fresh and strong and handsome. Only the youngest had, instead of a left arm, a swan's wing. They embraced and kissed each other, and then the queen went to the king and said, "Dearest husband, now I may speak and tell you I am innocent, and that I have been falsely accused." And she related the whole story of the old woman's deceit, and how her 3 children had been taken away and hidden. To the great delight of the king, the children were now produced, and the wicked stepmother was condemned to death and was burned to ashes on the scaffold. The king and queen, with her 6 brothers, lived happily ever after. So that's